Good afternoon and welcome to QAGOMA. My name is Cameron Brune, I'm the Editorial Director of Architecture Media. I'd like to begin this afternoon's conversation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for a special program presented in partnership with the Asia Pacific Architecture Forum, which is currently being held at venues across Brisbane and goes through until Monday, concluding 2 weeks of celebrating architecture from Brisbane and the Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific Architecture Forum is an initiative of Architecture Media, the organisation I work for, and the State Library of Queensland, located right next door. And it's fantastic to have presented this program in association with QAGOMA. Today for our conversation we're joined by three special guests. Michael Kennedy, owner of Kennedy's Timbers. Maybe put your hand up. Oh. Michael O'Sullivan, design manager at QAGOMA. And Tara Nagesh, associate curator, Asian art at QAGOMA. Would you please welcome them? Now, to get things underway, I'd just like to say a few words about each of them biographically to give you a sense of the expertise and point of view that they bring to our conversation this afternoon. Michael Kennedy, first of all, established in 1995, Kennedy's Timbers are recognised as a leading supplier of Australian timber and have been supplying recycled and eco-sustainable timber to the commercial and residential industries. The timber that was used in Asim Waqif's spectacular installations behind us was supplied by Kennedy's Timbers. Tara Nagesh has curated and worked on a number of exhibitions at the gallery, including APT8, APT7, Future Beauty, 30 Years of Japanese Fashion, and Hanger, Modern Japanese Prints. Michael O'Sullivan joined the exhibition design team here at the gallery just prior to GOMA opening in 2006. He's played an integral role in the design and presentation of all the major exhibition programs presented by QAGOMA in recent years. As design manager, Michael leads a multidisciplinary team of exhibition designers, graphic designers, web and multimedia designers, art installers, tradespeople and artisans. Would you please welcome them? Thank you. Today, our conversation is exploring the curatorial, design, engineering and supply challenges involved in realising and installing Asim Waqif's large-scale installation, All We Leave Behind Are the Memories, 2015, which of course is located behind you and will make its presence known, I imagine, audibly throughout our conversation, depending on how people are interacting with it. So what I thought I'd do to get things started is ask each of our guests to give us a little bit of an overview about their relationship to the work and the way in which it's been presented here in the gallery. And we'll start with Taryn talking a little bit about the curatorial.
Sure, thanks Cameron, and welcome everyone. So I guess I can really start at the beginning, talking about working with Asim Waqif for APT8. So this really came out of a research trip we did to India in mid-2014, specifically looking for artists for APT8. And we came across Asim's studio, and immediately, I was with our deputy director, Maud Page, and immediately we got very, very excited. Basically, I think, one of the interesting things that appealed initially was that this was someone coming into the contemporary art world at a different angle and was really doing quite unique things. He'd only recently made the change, only a couple of years, and a very kind of sudden change from architecture to art. And even though he was doing quite similar projects, working on projects that weren't buildings per se, but exploring aspects of architecture. And he said he'd been kind of presenting things in an architectural context and not really getting much interest. And he kind of quite deliberately, and he was pushed by some people in the kind of Delhi contemporary art network to do something in gallery spaces, and immediately people responded very warmly to what he was doing. But when we first met him, you could just see we visited his studio, and going through India, the Indian contemporary art market is it's quite a commercially driven art market. So you get to a lot of studios, and they're kind of big, kind of polished, blingy things that often are made by a whole bunch of other people in their studios, and the artist kind of directs and orders things. But Asim's was very, very different, and he had kind of one side to his practice was this real interest in materiality. He had kind of things like that. Materials he was treating with acid in his studio. Speakers linked up to pieces of timber and things like that. But also wasn't really working with anyone else, but also had this architectural knowledge, so working on actual designs and drawings at the same time. So immediately we saw it was something very different. It's not that unusual these days to see people coming from the architecture background to present things in galleries, either named as architects or named as artists. In fact, we've had a Queenslander cut up and put on the wall in this very space before. But I could see that he was really interested in that process and the challenges that he wanted to impose on that process of presenting things in galleries. And we could see he was very ambitious, but we also had this space, and it was an opportunity for him to do something much bigger than he had in the past. But also he's got a very, very, very strong interest in exploring building regulations and recycling and sustainability, and something we knew he'd be very interested to explore on a local level here. And so Asim came and visited us on a very early research trip where really didn't have too focused of an idea what he was going to do. But one of the things he really wanted to look at was discarded materials, and particularly discarded building materials. And I was just telling Michael before that we kind of drove around looking at lots of different kind of salvage yards and kind of trash heaps, and it was quite funny because Future Beauty, the Japanese exhibition, was on at the time, and Audi was the sponsor, and we had this shiny, brand new black Audi, and it's these two Indian guys turning up to these trash heaps in kind of suburban southeast Queensland. But one night I took him out for dinner with some friends who are architects, and they said, "Oh, you're looking for old timbers. Have you been to Kennedy's?" And I said, "Oh, where's that?" And so we went there the next morning, and we kind of walked in, and Asim's eyes just lit up, and all of a sudden this kind of impossible project that was going all these different ways, we kind of found the instrument to do it. Yeah.
That might be the perfect segue. Thank you.
It's very deliberate.
To ask Michael Kennedy to just talk about that introduction, that first meeting, and how you became involved with the project.
Yeah, it was really interesting because, as you said in the intro, we've been doing timber recycling for a long time, and we got a phone call saying, from the GOMA, we're looking to use some recycled timber, and it was interesting because we've actually got quite a bit of our timber in the gallery already as flooring and cladding, and so I had no concept of what the artist was looking for, so I didn't have any idea.
It sounds like he didn't really either, in a way.
And
no.
And I guess it came out, the delegation came out and walked through the yard and said, "Well, show me what you've got. Look at this." And we had big timber, and he's going, "Wow, yeah, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that." And I'm going, "What the hell are they going to do with all this?" I thought, goodness me. And then the process started because it was interesting to build things out of it. These materials have come out of a structure that has reached the end of its service life. Principally, these timbers have come out of the Shorncliffe Jetty, which most people will know, and opens again this Friday with a lot of timber back in there we've supplied. And some also comes from the old police wharf underneath the Story Bridge. A number of years ago, some of it fell into the river, and there was an SOS call to come and rescue that, and that's where this material came from. And to reuse it again, once that structure is not of a standard that can stay open, it's deconstructed. The process, once the material is selected, to go, okay, is it suitable to make into an artwork? Is it structurally okay? So we had to, with the GOMA, get a timber engineer to certify it all. Yes, is it going to be okay to put up? How are you going to fix it? How are you going to design it? Is it safe? Is it free of toxins for people to touch and hold, and that whole process to go through to get it here? And then I guess the process of building it, and once the display is finished, to go, right, what happens to this now? And the wonderful thing about it is that Queensland has a history of being built on timber and tin, and years ago we had the crunch and dump, and hence the iconically the Dean brothers, and now even the Dean brothers recycle the material, pull it out and make it available, and this material is being made available, put into a really highly valued and exhibition from a structure that was discarded or of no use. And once this display reaches the concludes, the material can be deconstructed again and put into another use, whether that's in whether it be put into furniture or in a house or in a public display or in a bar. Or it's a great credit to the gallery and the artist that they could see the vision in what I saw was a pile of wood, and coming in and see this and go, holy dooly. You know,
it's much more than a pile of wood now.
Well, it's a shame to pull it down. It's that beautiful. You want us to keep it here, but you've got to keep putting new displays. But it really is. I think you should keep some of it. It looks so good.
All we leave behind are the memories.
Oh, that's it. Well, remember what it was like, because it really is fascinating.
So we have an artist, we have a curatorial agenda. He's here. We have some materials in a yard. And that's 2/3 of the way. Michael, can you talk us through how the third part of this journey actually plays out?
Yeah, well, I think because we were certainly involved in the early discussions about, and we'd always intended on offering this space to the artist to fill. And I think up until the point of finding Kennedy's and the sheer scale of the timber that your yard could offer, we're thinking, how substantially are we going to occupy this space, or how's the artist going to work with this space? And then the sort of the opposite dilemma came about, where suddenly we've got more timber than we can possibly know what to do with, and timber at this incredible scale. So you've got these huge sort of 12, 14 metre, lengths of laminated hardwood timber.
So how did it get here?
A few trucks, a few cranes, and we've kind of got a fairly well-practiced routine now where we end up having to pull the front doors off the building, because although we've got a really great loading dock downstairs and big art lifts that take materials through, almost everything we do these days is bigger and beyond the capacity of those spaces. So the doors come off the building. We do all-night runs with cranes and trucks to get materials through and into the building, and get the doors back on before we open the next day. So we got it all in. We worked a lot with engineers to understand just how much the building can bear, in terms of load and structure, and because I think Asim was very keen, although there are big sort of parts or Lego bricks to play with, that he wanted the process to be as sort of spontaneous as possible. So that idea that he could get in, there was no sort of predetermined outcome necessarily to the structure.
So there wasn't a set of architectural drawings to explain where everything should be?
Well, he did send some drawings over, but I think that was
Fictional
more
drawings.
to kind of to keep us off his back, because we were there working to try and quantify this work, and fundamentally, I don't think the artist wanted to be quantified in that way. He wanted it to be this spontaneous reaction to the space, to the materials that showed up, and in a lot of ways it did become that. Although we had the big cranes and the forklifts and things here, he ended up building some really good relationships with the site foreman and the crew that were working on it, and even empowered them to a degree to make their own decisions about where things would go and how, within the sort of the rhythm of the project, they would place materials and join things together. So
in that sense, quite different to making architecture or an interior design or even exhibition design. in the kind of formal sense.
I think we naturally need try to quantify and program these types of things, and at the very least make sure that they're going to be safe and occupiable or interactive for audiences. And Asim came to us with this brief that everything needed to be a bit risky and a bit precarious and a bit dangerous, and how we were able to sort of wrestle with that brief in terms of this big structure, but also the idea that he wanted people to really be hands-on with it and touch it and interact with it. So some dilemmas there about how to create this impression of precariousness and risk, but also have something that's ultimately safe enough to have whole busloads of school children climbing all over and interacting with.
Which I can imagine was a pretty difficult task.
Yeah, but there's all these little enticements in there, and of course we can hear them, triggers in there that whether you touch it or whether you interact, jump on it, interrupt the light that passes through it, and all of those things trigger these little sounds or experiences that let you know that the structure's alive. It kind of speaks a little bit to this sort of this history, this embodied kind of history that's evident in the structure, and really it's asking you to come and touch it and explore it, and it rewards you for your inquisitiveness. So
I want to just pick up your point about danger and bring that back to Taryn. And he talks about Waqif talks about his studio as being on the border of legality. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about that site visit.
Sure. So we visited some quite successful artists in Delhi as well, I think even on the same day, and some of the galleries there, and they are lavish places, beautiful apartments, and there's big money in that industry. And then we hunted down Asim's studio, and it's really in a completely different neighbourhood, and this neighbourhood, it's just a really Delhi's very segmented into different neighbourhoods and suburbs. And so there's a huge kind of class difference. And Asim's studio was one of the only ones really we went to that was, really bustling neighbourhood. A lot of kind of street traffic and food stalls and carts being carried down the street. And then Asim's studio is kind of perched on the second level of this building, which is obviously a residential building, but would be quite cheap living spaces, and it's got this big kind of window that's it's like a doorway, so maybe it was used for loading things in and out, but a level up. And at one stage we were kind of sitting there chatting, and he was showing all these things, and it is a dangerous space. There's things connected everywhere, and like I said before, acid corroding something in that space, and timber and tools and kind of stuff everywhere. And we had kind of a long chat, and so it felt kind of quite alive, but a bit kind of raw and organic as well. And at one stage, I think the person next door or something went out, and the door closed, and we actually got locked in there. And it was very funny because I said, "Oh, this is your way of bargaining to get into the exhibition, isn't it?" And he had to jump out the window to come up to let us out. So, and I think that it's not so much unsafe or risky, but he's interested in the perceptions of the unsafe and the risky. And he talks a lot about a structure like this and other structures he's created before using trash and things. And I think this does relate to his architectural background, where he knows how to make things safe. He knows how to read plans and understand, load bearing and those, and how to speak to engineers. So he knows it's safe, but he's interested in how it might look unsafe, and how, and it's quite evident in this structure here, how there are areas where it doesn't look like you should be able to go through. But then you go through and something's activated, and you kind of get that reward that you wouldn't have got if you hadn't have navigated through there. When the school groups come through, they're kind of all over it. But you actually notice when it's quieter and there's just a few people, they're very hesitant to kind of to breach it. So it's quite interesting. And he's interested in testing those things. You know, when we say you can't climb on this, you can't enter this space, it's unsafe, and he didn't want to disrupt that safety, but he wanted to question, oh, well, is it really unsafe, or do we just bring these kind of conventions upon ourselves? Yeah.
And it seems to me that thing about bringing that architectural training is quite significant, because he knows what the limit is. He knows that you can do this up to a point.
Yeah.
And I wonder, Michael, whether you, Michael Kennedy, sorry, it's going to get confusing. Michael, you could talk about the way in which the use of timber in architecture actually reflects Waqif's interest in testing the limits of what it could do, about, for example, how big a timber building could be, or what we do with a building when it's no longer useful.
As I mentioned before, the Queensland was built on timber and tin. We have the timber bridges, the timber wharves, like Shorncliffe Jetty and all those other places, and the timber houses around Paddington and all that. And years ago, all of those buildings, when they reached the end of their life, were crunched and dumped and put in landfill. It was unusual for it to be recycled. And the Dean brothers, who mentioned here, were famous for crunching and dumping. And as people have become more aware of environmental issues, there's been, the timber's been recognised for its inherent value and the carbon that it stores there. There's been more of a move towards, hang on, we can do something with that. Let's pull it down. Let's deconstruct it. And that has really developed into quite a big industry across Australia, really, from right through all the states. It's really become quite big, even to the point now where all the power poles that are used are recycled, put back into use and cut up into things like the Tree of Knowledge at Barcaldine. But in terms of architecture, the architects are going, we want to use a product that is environmentally friendly. So we all know that wood stores carbon. It's a green product to use. So architects and designers can build a structure using wood, and in such a manner, like we've got here in the display, you can build a structure, and when that structure reaches the end of its service life, which unfortunately this is going to happen, unfortunately, it can be deconstructed and put back into another use, often of higher value. I look at the timbers that are here that are in an art display that came from discarded wharves that was regarded as suitable for landfill. And some of this is going to go back into much higher value, whether it's high-end furniture or floorboards or feature posts. And the whole design of structures means that, as we discussed before, that now you can build 12-storey high timber buildings. The building code has been amended so that we are going to see more of this sort of structure being made. You can imagine a block of apartments in the valley being built out of timber not dissimilar to this, like the old wool stores used to be. We'll start to see that, and then it will be built with a design life of 30, 40, 50 years, and then it will be built so that it can be deconstructed and put back into a higher value. So it really is a significant change in how materials are used and how architecture is done.
So Michael, do you see a similar thing happening in the world of, say, exhibition design, about the use of materials, or are you regularly encountering artists who are asking difficult questions about what's being used to install a work or make a work in a gallery?
Well, this work really kind of connects with principles that we're working with every day in terms of our exhibition design, the types of sort of deconstructible partition systems and things that we're trying to integrate into our exhibition design, and the potential reuse of layouts and materials. I mean, purely from a budget point of view, that there's an imperative for us to extract the most value out of our fit outs, but also I think there's a broader expectation around responsible use of materials, sustainable practices and that type of thing. So I think it's been really interesting for us working with these materials, even adjusting our sort of preconceptions of the value of this kind of timber. I think initially expecting that it would be a very difficult thing to work with, very difficult to engineer, quite precarious in terms of public safety, and as we work through each of those problems, identifying or sort of cancelling those things out to a degree and understanding how, how much durability and scope there is to work with the material, how practical it can be.
It seems to me that list you just outlined suggests the installation of the work was challenging on many, many fronts.
It's problem-solving exercises like a lot of the things we do, but I think it certainly had they were very kind of manageable problems at the end of the day, as we kind of worked through them one by one in terms of putting it up, and ultimately it did more or less become as straightforward as as playing with big tools and big bits of timber in the space and sculpting something amazing out of it. So.
And it's that issue of scale that seems to be the scale is impressive, and hence a number of the challenges come out of that.
Yeah, I think, look, for me, this work really is probably one of the most successful works in this space because it really embraces the context. I think there's a fantastic connection in terms of what it's talking about and the issues, and even the way it connects with the city, and the way that you can put all of those things together as a visitor. And this space is a potentially tricky space to use for art. It's flooded with natural light. It doesn't sort of fit within a lot of the typical constraints of a museum and gallery sort of space, and it's a really public space. So so the idea that this artwork is a very kind of embraces visitors and encourages interaction and sort of works with all of those things, the constraints that the building or opportunities that the building can offer in this context is for me a really good outcome.
Yeah. Well, I think that the outcome speaks of opportunities, not challenges, doesn't it? So we should frame it that way. I want to sort of delve into the title of the work, I guess. All we leave behind are the memories. Taryn, can you tell us where that comes from and the journey that Asim took to find that name?
Yeah, sure. The idea of memory is something that Asim speaks a lot about in memory in materials, memory in recycling, and even a lot of the space we would kind of remove any kind of remnants of the process or what had come before, but he was very particular about keeping some of them. Because this idea of memory.
There's bits on the timber.
Yeah, so you can see. He wanted to leave all those bolts exposed and leave all those old fittings on the timber. But you'll also see on the walls, there's places where the builders have actually, drawn up sums and things to work out how to put it together, and some of the drawings are pasted on the back, and even left some of the walls unpainted from the exhibition prior to that. So Asim he talks a lot about this idea of memory, and he was one of the things he initially wanted to explore in Brisbane was looking at some of the abandoned buildings and abandoned spaces. And in India, he just did a whole exhibition and often does projects in buildings that have been abandoned. Of course, in Australia, it's very hard to get access to those or permissions to do an actual project. But when he discovered the Dean brothers, he was completely fascinated. But also because, being a Muslim Indian, and the Dean brothers are known for being
an entirely serendipitous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Being kind of community leaders of Muslim Queenslanders for generations and generations, and coming from a similar part of the region. I think he really resonated with him. He really wanted to kind of invite them along, and we contacted them a couple of times. So it was a really kind of nice, interesting connection. And in one sense, he doesn't at all kind of necessarily advocate what they did, but he's very much interested in the processes.
And the way
so that those ideas still connect in that kind of on that kind of tangent, I guess.
So in that sense, do you think that the work and its title, particularly for Brisbane audiences and Queensland audiences of a particular age, is a reminder of what we've lost?
Yeah, I don't know, because I mean, then he didn't delve too much into that history. I think maybe he just really thought it was, you know, if you look up demolition or you know, recycling or, you know, urban development, we've got this incredibly famous story in Brisbane that people really know, you know. And I think he was just fascinated by that. And because I guess the clandestine nature of the Dean brothers as well. When, you know, and he does speak a lot about in India, you can get, you know, things happen and they are, you know, covered up or they're not known, and places like Australia are very, very regulated, you know, incredibly regulated, you know, which she's interested to challenge. But, you know, alongside that, you've got this, you know, really kind of iconic story of demolition, and, you know, as Australians, we tend to kind of celebrate the kind of the bad things, you know, the enemies of the state.
Michael, I wonder whether you might delve a little bit more deeply into it.
There's been some work done in the policy area with the Queensland government to, certainly through public works and those places, to recognise that when structures come down, whether they be a rail bridge or a road bridge or power poles through Energex, that those materials have a inherent value. And I guess we talk about, in our business, we talk about the fibre value of that timber. So because the timber is generally of a really high fibre value, it's, you know, it's quite hard and durable.
Yes, so maybe you should tell us what fibre value is.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So fibre value is the wood is a cellulose material made up of a whole series of fibres, and because of the nature of or the properties of the wood, they are of a very high value to reuse because they don't deteriorate over time. They tend to withstand the Queensland climate quite well. So they can get wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, and not deteriorate like a piece of, if you put a piece of paper out, it'll deteriorate, or other products will deteriorate, or steel may tend to rust. The wood can last an incredible long time because of the properties of the wood or the fibre. So what's happened is that there's been some changes in regulation in terms of recognising the importance of that and recognising that it should be reused or made available to reuse. And through the whole demolition permit scheme is now there's a requirement for them to have recycling plans. So if it's a government building, for example, part of that will be to indicate that product is being recycled, whether it's concrete, steel, timber, and that's made available to people like us and to Tim's Metal and to Queensland Recycling for concrete, and all of that recognise the value of the product that's in there. So it's been I guess it's been a good process. It came out of a time when that probably has some not so good memories for people of iconic buildings and structures being knocked down, but from that dark days there's been a great awakening in terms of potential to reuse material, and to such an extent that probably the work that's done in Queensland by the Queensland government over a number of years probably leads Australia in terms of some of the recycling that they're doing of buildings. And that's not only recycling the buildings, but putting them back into public displays, whether it's like this gallery or a number of other the Tree of Knowledge, heaps of other buildings where they're saying, hey, let's use products that have had a former life, put them back into a public display because of the wood fibre quality being so high, and it being a good story to tell.